Hello, everybody. I'm still Dan Wright, and it's still my job to thank people. And we have a lot of people to thank, and we'll be thanking them throughout the conference. But right now, I would like to highlight one of our sponsors in particular. I'd like to talk to you briefly about Grant Street Group, who has, I believe, been the longest running sponsor that TPF has ever had. I can't remember. Go ahead. Grant Street Group, these guys are awesome. Okay, they have been there for Perl for everything. I can't remember a conference that they didn't sponsor. And anytime we need something when we're running a conference, we know that if we just go to Grant Street and say, hey, we're in a bind, we need this thing, can you help us? They always do. And so there's some great guys, and they do some really cool stuff. And I would like to introduce right now Paul Tomlinson. Mr. Tomlinson is a software development team leader at Grant Street Group, and he works on the Payment Express project there. He's done some great work both at Grant Street Group and companies like Amazon, United Health Group, and Endurance, and others. So Paul's going to come up here and introduce our keynote speaker. So let's hear it for Paul.
Thought it was a little bit fun that Dan would introduce me so I could come up here and introduce Vicky. I couldn't find anybody to introduce Dan, but we'll work on that chain next time. So I'm up here trading on Grant Street's goodwill. I've only been with them for about 2.5 years now. Grant Street is, we do financial processing for government in, usually related to taxes and whatnot. Super stable, slow moving, high focus on quality. And we've been using Perl since '95. And we've been doing the government software thing for the last, or about 20 years, and experiencing an annual compound growth rate of 20% that entire time, on average. So we're really stable, we're always hiring. And so just a note about our relationship with Perl is we started with Perl because that's what one of the engineers there knew, but they kept hiring for it because they could build an ecosystem in it. Perl is not for everybody, and it's not necessarily for every problem. Perl is really good at working with data. And other more modern languages that have come along tend to optimize their concerns a little bit more differently for processing data in this way or processing data in that way. Well, Perl can be optimized for processing data in any of these ways. It's kind of a Swiss Army chainsaw. So it might not be the best or the most optimized for one of these little niche problems, but what we found is by being so generalizable, well, it works as it does what it does. It's good at that. But the most important part is Perl developers. So Perl developers, by having a generalizable mindset and being able to think of more than one way to do these things, are really good at problem solving. So whether or not Perl is the best language, that's a long debate to have with anybody about anything. Perl developers tend to be the best developers. So we hire for that, we cultivate it, we try to participate in the community because we love what we get out of Perl developers who can solve those problems. So I've only been there 2.5 years. That's kind of the average tenure for the company, even though we keep hiring, because we hire people on and they tend to stay for a really long time. So anybody who's there has been there for a while, is well entrenched, tries to participate in the community. We've got 10 people here at the conference. So you'll be seeing us running around if we can answer anything for you or get your resumes. We're always hiring. So that's our spiel there. We like Perl, we love it. We participate in the community wherever we can. We release to open source, and we try to have a supportive culture both in and outside of the company. So that's what I get to say because we're sponsoring. The most important part, though, is Vicky Brasseur here is going to talk to you about the importance of ecosystem and maintaining the larger picture outside of Grant Street, because we understand that other people use Perl as well. So if you would please welcome Vicky to the stage.
Well, hi, everyone. I just want to tell you up front, this is not an audience participation keynote. So get it out of your system right now, because I don't want interruptions. Just want to let you know. Can you hear me okay in the back? Awesome, thanks. So, all right, let me start my timer. So hello, hi, how are ya? My name is VM Brasseur, but because we're all friends here, you can call me Vicky. I am an open source policy and strategy freelancer. I've spent previously a lot of time with Perl. I'm the former organizer of the San Francisco Perl Mongers. I'm the winner of the 2014 White Camel Award. I'm an author and community moderator for opensource.com, the vice president of the Open Source Initiative, and the author of this, the first and only book on how to contribute to open source software. So your only pitch you're gonna get this entire thing is, please buy my book because it rocks. This is my contact information. I do encourage you to use it. Now let me do what we call in management and consulting, setting up expectations. You're probably going to be very glad to hear that this talk ain't gonna go the whole hour. I think around 40 minutes. So you can go and get lunch early. But that will probably be the only part of the keynote that you will be pleased to hear. There's going to be some hard truths, there's going to be some real talk, and there's going to be pictures of cute animals. So that should help. But first we're going to start by talking about science. So science, yay science, I love science. So specifically we're going to talk about ecosystems. What are they? What even is an ecosystem? Well, this is 2018. If you want to learn something about a new concept, you go to Wikipedia, where anybody with an internet connection and an attitude can become an expert. So this is what Wikipedia says about ecosystems. And yes, I am going to read it, because not everybody can see the screen. A community is made up of living organisms and non-living components, such as air, water, and mineral soil. Ecosystems may be studied either as contingent collections of plants and animals or as structured systems and communities that are governed by general rules. So it's long, it's unwieldy, but it's very specific. So I like things that are shorter and easy to consolidate to people. Notice this talk is going short. So I go to the dictionary, everybody's favorite snarky internet dictionary. They're amazing on Twitter. This is how they define an ecosystem: as the complex of a community of organisms and its environment functioning as an ecological unit. Short, sweet, to the point. This is what an ecosystem is, and it's what I'm going to be discussing throughout this entire keynote today. And ecosystems are everywhere. Everywhere you look, there is an ecosystem. They can be absolutely massive, like the Sahara Desert, or they can be really tiny, like a backyard pond, smaller than a bathtub. Just big, little ecosystems can be composed of smaller ecosystems. And they're not simply environmental and ecological, because we humans like to use this word to describe industries and investments and technologies and any other human undertaking. We describe them in terms of ecosystems. They are everywhere, but right now I'm just going to focus on natural ecosystems, the ones you typically think about when I say the word ecosystem. Now, every natural ecosystem out there, every single one, has to have these four components in order to be successful. You have those things that other things live on or move through, like air, land, water. And then you have those very, very vital pieces that turn sunlight into energy, because those vital base producers are then consumed, nom nom nom. They're consumed by the consumers, who then consume other consumers, nom nom nom. Lots of eating going on here. But eventually the consumers will go away, as will all of the other elements here, and you need the decomposers, because the decomposers help to maintain a cycle and a balance in the ecosystem, and that is key, because balance is key. Large, small, it doesn't matter what size or what nature they take, all ecosystems must maintain the correct balance in order to operate or even to exist at all. So too much of one part in an ecosystem or not enough of another, and the entire ecosystem is thrown out of whack. Now I'm going to start with what has become the textbook example of ecosystems. Literally, you find it in textbooks. So who here has heard of the wolves in Yellowstone National Park? Not everyone, that's good, because I'm going to tell you the story anyway. So, it is now story time. Let me tell you about the wolves. Back in the mid-1800s, thousands of settlers, they migrated across this country of ours to the western reaches of North America. And as they found new locations for their homes, they did what seemed reasonable at the time, and that is they killed anyone and anything that they feared. And one of the things they feared were wolves. Wolves were one of the victims of this expansion because wolves like to eat livestock. Nom, nom, nom. They also sometimes like to eat people, but mostly they preferred livestock because livestock didn't fight back quite as much and didn't have guns. So the end result of this is that by the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, all wolves were either killed or driven out of the area that became Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. No more wolves, no more puppies. This meant that the settler livestock was safe. No more wolf predation. But it also meant that not just the livestock were safe, but all of the other animals in what became Yellowstone, they also were no longer getting eaten by wolves. And that sounds great, right? No voracious beasts chasing you down and eating you. Yay, this is progress. Awesome. But despite that progress, in the 1990s, some folks thought, well, maybe we should bring back the wolves. Maybe we should bring them back to Yellowstone. Perhaps, now this is just a crazy thought, perhaps killing all of them was quite literally overkill. So I'm sure the fact that this land was no longer really being used for grazing, and so there was no longer any money in it, that had no factor in at all in bringing back the wolves. None at all. But it doesn't matter, they did it. Doesn't matter why, but they did this and they relocated some wolf families to the park. And they kept a really close eye on them because these are scientists and that's what they do. They keep a close eye on things. So for all those years, nearly 100 years, there had been no apex predators in the Yellowstone National Park. That hadn't been that top of the food chain because we had killed off all of the wolves. Water. And because we had killed off all the wolves, for nearly a century, the elks had been having an amazing time. These guys were so happy. They had been eating whatever they want. They were wandering all over the place, doing whatever they wanted, and making tons of little baby elk. So once in a while, sure, a bear would take one out. Once in a while. But in general, they pretty much had the run of the place, along with what remained of their bison friends. Now the thing about elk is, they are pretty indiscriminate about what they eat. They have their preferences. They actually prefer willows down along the stream. Very tender, very juicy, very tasty. They like the willows. So they have their preferences, but they'll eat anything. They will eat trees, grasses, whatever, doesn't matter. So in the past century, while the wolves were gone and the elks were having a great big elk party, they were nibbling on things, and they would go to one spot and they would nibble, 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 and nibble everything down. And then they would move to another spot and then nibble, 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 nibble all the plants down. Now, again, they were very fond of willows, but they would eat anything. Now, things were not bare. They weren't completely bare here, but the plants didn't have a lot of opportunity to grow very tall either. So, TLDR, you had lots of elk, low vegetation. And then the wolves came, and the wolves showed up. And what they saw arrayed in front of them was an all-you-can-eat elk buffet. I mean, there were elk everywhere. So naturally, when there's so much food lying around, the wolves, as you would imagine, they did pretty well. They multiplied, and they stuck around. And the scientists look at this, and they said, go us. Yes, we are successful. This is a great experiment. Mark one up for science. So that was great. But the scientists, being scientists, they kept an eye on things because experiments sometimes take a long time, so they kept an eye on things. And they noticed some things they didn't expect. So the wolves, they're smart creatures, right? They're like dogs, and they figured out, hey, elk like willow. So they would hang out by the water where the willows were because they knew the elk would be coming by because elks wanted to go and nibble, 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 right? The elk, also surprisingly, not stupid. They figured out that if I want willow, there's going to be some sort of wolf waiting for me. So they would show up, they'd get a bite, and then they'd bugger out, right? Because they didn't want to get eaten by wolves. So what this did is it allowed the willows to grow a lot more. They got a lot taller, and they provided a lot more shade, and that shade provided habitat for fishes. And what you ended up with was a very large increase in the population of fishes in Yellowstone National Park. But that's not all they did. The willows also provided building material and food for beavers. I don't know what it is about willow, but critters like eating it. Now I kind of want to go taste some willow. But so the beavers liked to eat the willow as well, but they couldn't before because there wasn't enough. The elk would just nibble, 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 and it was gone. So they returned to streams once more once the willows were available to them and they had food. Now the return of the beavers have a tendency to do this. They build dams. Now these dams increase the habitat for fish, so you got even more fish. How cool is that? Fish are great. But it also led to the beaver dams changing the flow of the streams back into the channels that they had before the wolves disappeared. And that doesn't seem significant. It's just a stream changing. But when the streams were there, the grasslands were healthier. So with the stream's return, the grassland also got healthier. And so there were more birds and more bison and more bear, and everyone was happy because the wolves came back. Scientists returning the wolves did so much more than anyone expected. It rebalanced an ecosystem in what was called a trophic cascade. And that is an important term. What is a trophic cascade? We're talking a powerful indirect interaction that can control the entire ecosystem. Now, it can come top down when you remove a big predator like the wolves. It can also come bottom up when you remove those base producers. Right? At either end of the spectrum, it doesn't matter. When either of these occur and you remove these from the equation, the ripple effects, it cascades throughout all parts of the ecosystem. Now, a trophic cascade is not usually considered a good thing, as you can probably imagine, but partly it's because it can lead to a cascade effect. Too long in a trophic cascade, you reach cascade effect. And I know, I'm sorry, trophic cascade sounds like cascade effect. I apologize, blame the scientists. But this is what we're going to work with here. So, trophic cascade is you're starting that downward trend. Cascade effect, you have gone off the cliff. And you are on a fast path to an extinction level event. So a cascade effect, it can be caused by the extinction of a key species, but it also can be caused by introducing a new species that doesn't have any predators in there. Either way, it doesn't matter because the imbalance becomes so bad the entire ecosystem collapses and it dies. So it's story time again. So last century, Pacific sea otters, they were hunted nearly to extinction. We human beings, we seem to really like otter fur, but we prefer it if the otters are not inside. So we killed the otters, and so while in the Yellowstone example, the wolves were the apex predator, right? They were at the top of the food chain. Otters are not at the top of the food chain. The top of their food chain is actually the great white shark. And what otters are is they're known as a keystone species. Now, how many of you know about the keystone on an arch? It's that piece right at the top where if you remove it, the entire arch collapses. That is what the otter is in its particular ecosystem. It was the keystone species, and when you remove it, the entire ecosystem collapses, and we removed it. Now, why did it all collapse? It's because otters eat sea urchins. They love the spiny little buggers. They will eat them night and day. They think they are the best thing ever. So when the otters went away, the sea urchins were really stoked. They were like, OMG, no more predators, how great is this? So they found they could do whatever they wanted. And what sea urchins really want to do more than anything else is eat kelp. So the urchins ate some kelp, and the urchins multiplied. And then the urchins ate some more kelp, and then the urchins multiplied some more. It was great for the urchins. They were really enjoying this, except they multiplied so much that they ate all of the kelp. And then there were no more urchins. All of the urchins died. Now, the kelp that the urchins were eating, it was home to hundreds of other species. So when the kelp went away, all of those other species went away too. They either died or they moved away. And this led to massive pieces of the coastline of North America on the west coast. They became deserts. The ecosystem had suffered a massive trophic cascade due to the near extinction of otters. Thankfully, in this case at least, the process could be reversed. Otters, they became protected as an endangered species. Yay, great idea. So scientists took some of them, there were still a few by Alaska, and they brought them down, and they put them down around Monterey on the California coast. And after several years of the otters being there down near the Monterey coast, the cascade effect disappeared. The kelp came back, and balance was returned to that ecosystem. Unfortunately, most cascading ecosystems are not that lucky. So yes, cute animals, we love them, they're adorable, they're awesome, but what does this have to do with Perl? Every single programming language, every free and open source software community, each and every one of them has an ecosystem. Now, some of you may recognize this. This is a CPAN diagram that Brian D. Foy made in 2011. You can see how the different pieces of the CPAN ecosystem interact. And this is just CPAN, right? It's not even the entirety of the Perl world. This is just one piece of it. And each piece here could be its own sub-ecosystem. So if you look at CPAN testers here, that's actually its own little ecosystem, its own world. And CPAN itself is, again, contained within the ecosystem of Perl. It is ecosystems all the way down. Now, just like natural ecosystems, free and open source software ecosystems, they also have elements that they must have in order to be successful. You have infrastructure, just the basic nuts and bolts of keeping things running. Obviously, you have the project. You have the code, its documentation. Please document your code. You have the code, its documentation, its tests. Right? That's another element that everything must have. Those are the technical sides of things. Then you have the people side of things, which are the users and the maintainers. Without a user for your project, why do you even have a project? It has no reason for being. So users are very important. But maintainers are also important because otherwise that entire project will die. It will not be maintained. It will be full of bugs. Nobody will want to use it. The users will go away. Your project will go away. All right. So obviously, this is an oversimplification of a very complex system, but it's a useful one. So also like the natural world, Perl has a river. Now, Perl has been around for 30 years. Happy birthday, Perl. So Perl has been around for 30 years, so this concept is relatively new in the Perl world. It's only been around since 2015, the QA hackathon at 2015. And this is the CPAN River. Now, this is a model to help ensure a healthy ecosystem for CPAN modules. Perl 5, sorry for y'all over here, I got a pointer at this side. So Perl 5 is up here, and this is the source of the river. Modules in CPAN, they're then located on the river based upon how many other modules directly or indirectly depend upon them. So if you break a module anywhere on this river, you break everything downstream of it. If you have a module on which nothing relies, nothing has it as a dependency, then it gets to swim out here in the ocean, free. It is free in the sea of CPAN. So the closer modules are placed on the river to the P5P source, the more they are directly or indirectly relied upon by other things, and so therefore the more stuff they can break if they themselves do something wrong. This is a quote from the blog post where Neil Bowers, who apologizes for not being here, he misses you all, by the way, where he first wrote about the CPAN River. And what he says here is, if you pollute a river, you might cause problems for everyone downstream of you. And you're relying on the distributions upstream of you not polluting the river. Now, the river is an excellent way to visualize and talk about the overall health of the technical ecosystem of Perl. So whoever was at the 2015 QA hackathon with Neil Bowers and everyone, great. This is great work. This is an excellent tool. It is super effective for helping discuss the complexities of CPAN module interactions. I love it. So that's the technical side of things, though. But because there are people involved, the technical aspects aren't the only important part, and they might not even be the most important part. There's a lot more to it than that. For instance, let's take the reputation. The reputation of an ecosystem as well as its constituent parts. Let's talk about that. So I don't know how many of you know, a lot of you probably don't know me, a lot of you do. I travel a lot. I do this a lot. I speak at tons of free and open source software events. And I help so many different communities do so many different things, right? I'm not just Perl. Let's call me free and open source minister without portfolio. So in the course of going to all these events, I speak with hundreds of people every year, and Perl comes up way more often than you would imagine. It comes up all the time, but it means I get to see the Perl ecosystem through the outside world. And of course, the very first thing a lot of people talk about, because these are technical conferences, they talk about the technical side of it, and they talk about the language and the reputation of the language. And they say things that you've all heard so many times over the years. Perl, unreadable. And they like to chuckle to themselves, ha 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 ha. Perl, is that still around? Or Perl, the more serious people, Perl is not a modern language, and it isn't fit for modern tasks. That's the serious technical rebuttal that you will get to Perl when you speak to people. But most of you know in this room, it's really easy to address these comments with hard facts and myth bustings because they're based on outdated information. You all know that Perl can be readable. We have best practices. You all know that it's very modern and that you can do amazing, brilliant things with Perl. So it's pretty easy to refute these out-of-date conceptions with modern information. But all too often, the people I meet, they share comments about the reputation of the Perl community. From the outside, what are they seeing? And these stories they tell me, they are very rarely complimentary. And they're a lot harder to address than comments about the language, because these are based on their personal experiences and their current information. So often people will share with me the experiences they have had with the Perl community. For instance, I sent a bug to a CPAN module, and the maintainer closed it, saying it was stupid, and no one should ever use the software that way. My clicker's not clicking. There we go. Oops, go back one. I went to hash Perl on IRC. I went to the channel, but I left after seeing how people were treating each other in their own community. I had to support a Perl script at work, but I didn't understand it well, so I went to my local Perl users group, but they ignored me. I met a group of Perl people at a conference, but I felt really uncomfortable around them. They kept hitting on any woman who got near them and making rude comments about the women after they turned them down. Now, these are all true stories. They're all paraphrasings of just some. These are only some of the stories recently I have heard of people from their recent experiences with the Perl community from the outside. And these are the mild ones. I have heard far worse that I'm not sharing. So there's a lot more hostile and hostility that people are experiencing trying to enter your community. So however things may appear to you here on the inside, I can assure you that the outside world does not view the Perl community in a good light. And all of these experiences that people shared with me, each and every one, they occurred after the institution of the standards of conduct, which, I'm sorry, does not speak well to those standards. Those standards in which many members just obviously don't believe, or else these experiences would never occur. Those standards, which a lot of other people obviously are not upholding. Otherwise, these experiences would be denounced, but they're not. This sort of behavior should be intolerable according to those standards that you yourself have defined. And yet, it keeps happening. As a community, you are what you tolerate. So if unwelcoming behavior, if that is tolerated, then the community, whether you like it or not, is unwelcoming. And if you don't agree with unwelcoming behavior, but you turn a blind eye and you let it happen, then you are part of the problem. So a lot of people didn't tolerate this behavior. A lot of people saw it and they were like, no, I'm going to vote with my feet. I have an opportunity to leave and I'm going to do it. I will go to another community. And even more people, those external examples I listed above, they took one look at the community, they turned tail and they walked away and they never joined to begin with. And I support this very, very strongly. If you are in a bad situation, or if you see a bad situation, you get out. Full stop. You have the power to do that, and I support people doing that. But unfortunately, people getting out, it has a side effect, and that side effect is leaving behind an even higher concentration of tolerance for bullies and assholes. And a lot of you out there are probably looking at me and getting really angry and saying, no, you are wrong. There are good people in this community. And I'm going to say, yes, you are right. There are amazing people in this community. Just brilliant, kind, wonderful human being. You have Sawyer, you have RJBS, Gene Hack, Peregrine, Trog, Wendy, Liz. There are so many brilliant people in this community that people outside are never going to experience because they won't give your community a second chance. Larry Wall himself, Larry here, is, in my experience, the kindest human being in all of free and open source software. Full stop. And I know all of them. But that kindness, it's not appreciated nearly as much as it deserves, and it is certainly not reflected in the external reputation of the Perl community. So no, it's not all bad, but it's also not balanced either. Due to the attrition over the years caused by the more toxic influences of the community, there's this massive imbalance between kindnesses and assholery. And again, you are what you tolerate, and as the community that remains, it allows assholery to continue. All signs, every single one of them, point to the Perl ecosystem favoring technology over community, and rather than fostering a balance of both. What you see on the screen here is the motto of the Humane Development Movement. We are humans, working with humans to develop software for the benefit of humans. Now, judging from the reports I get from people external to the community, the Perl version of this motto looks like this. The people are gone. You focus on the technology rather than the people, rather than having balance. So right about now, I'm going to take a drink. Right about now, some of you are probably asking yourself, what in the hell is my point anyway? And you are fair to say that. After all, I have spent all of this time telling you about cute little puppy dog wolves and adorable little otters, and then I launched into a screed about toxic community. So what is going on here? Remember trophic cascades? Indirect actions controlling entire ecosystems? That is what Perl's toxic community is doing. It has taken control of the ecosystem. A cascade is right now in progress, and has been for many years. It doesn't matter which chart you look at. Every single one of them shows the same trend, a trend you are all already very familiar with, and that is the decline of the Perl ecosystem. And it's not because of the language. The language, as you all know, is really very, very good. And CPAN is amazing, and CPAN testers, please steal this pitch, every other language out there, right? The language, the technical side is great. It's not a technological problem that is causing this decline, it's a people problem. Every single one of these charts, if you notice, they are edging down to 0. And that means that this ecosystem is not in a trophic cascade. It is in a full-blown cascade effect. It is headed toward extinction because it has allowed technology side to become out of balance with the people side. But we learned from the otters and the kelp and the sea urchins, it is possible to reverse a cascade effect. It is possible to avoid extinction events. It's not easy. It's not. It requires intention, it requires attention, and it requires time and patience. But it can be done. Going back to the CPAN River, remember how I said it is a great way to visualize technical health? Because it is. This is a wonderful metaphor and model. So again, kudos to all y'all for coming up to this. So what if we were to visualize the health of the Perl community right now? We could do it like this. And, however accurate it may be, particularly for people on the outside looking in, this is not useful for actually taking action. So how about instead, you build upon the proven metaphor of the CPAN River, Expand upon it with like a community river, or I don't care, it doesn't matter, whatever metaphor makes sense, just find some way to visualize and talk about the overall health of the community part of the Perl ecosystem like you can with the CPAN, the technical side of the Perl ecosystem. And once you can visualize that community health, once you can look at it and picture where things are in the greater scheme of things, then you can start taking action. And you can take considered action that you know is going to make a considered effect. So what sort of actions can you take to start to move things back into balance? Well, I'm not going to tell you yet because I have another story. So, this is a story of another ecosystem that was successful. And it's time to learn about puffins. And oh my God, I love puffins. They are so fucking cute. So, puffins are amazing. They're cute little seabirds. They are not porgs. Puffins, so years ago, puffins used to be incredibly common across the northern Atlantic shore in North America. They were everywhere. They were like seagulls, except cute. So sailors, though, way back when, they decided that puffin eggs are really tasty. And you know what else is tasty? Puffin. So the sailors, they would stop at all the little islands and rocks along the coast, and they would collect eggs, and they would shoot some birds, and they would take them back to the ship, and they would have a great meal. Awesome. But the thing about puffins is, they're one of those birds who return to breed on the island where they're raised. And then when they do that, they only lay one egg. And they do it in this shallow little tunnel. And I haven't seen pictures of how they dig the tunnel, but I'm really curious. So they lay one single egg in this shallow tunnel. But if those single eggs, if those are collected, then none of them are hatching. And if the birds themselves are collected and no new ones are hatching, then, who's going to lay more eggs? No one. So as a result, as you would expect, the puffins disappeared, particularly along the coastline of the state of Maine. By 1901, puffins only existed on one tiny little pathetic, miserable rock near the state of Maine. There were more near Greenland, but overall, they were headed toward extinction. They were in a cascade effect. But then in 1969, there was a scientist, Stephen Kress, and he looked at his lovely state of Maine, and he's like, man, we could really use some puffins around here. So he gathered together this small, plucky team of scientists, and they went to Greenland, and they gathered chicks, and they put them in little soup cans, and they transported them to an island off the coast of Maine. And their thought was, okay, now if we can raise these chicks, then when they become adults, they'll come back, and they'll make their nests on this island where they were raised. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. So they did raise these chicks, and they hand-fed them in these tiny little specially created tunnels to fit a little human hand, right? And they raised them until they were strong enough to leave. Keep in mind, they did this despite the disapproval of other senior scientists. These other scientists, they said it's not a human's place to change the natural course of things. You shouldn't meddle. Don't meddle. Just observe the puffins. Let nature take its course. And obviously, as we all know here, those senior scientists, they were kind of ignoring the fact that humans had meddled and had caused the puffin problem in the first place. But it doesn't matter, because our plucky little team of scientists ignored the senior scientists, and they went ahead. And they kept moving and relocating and hand-feeding puffin chicks for 4 years. Nearly all of the chicks, nearly all of them survived and became adult, adorable puffins and flew away. But none of them were flying back. None were returning. So the team was like, what did we do wrong? And then they thought, well, maybe this island just doesn't look welcoming to other puffins because there are no puffins here. So they set up a bunch of puffin decoys, just tons of them on this rock, fake puffins. And this actually worked because the puffins they had raised were flying over the island, and they looked down, they're like, oh my God, there's a puffin party, I want to be a part of that. So they would land on the island. And puffins, despite being seabirds, are actually not idiots. So they would land and go, hey, you're not a real puffin. But it didn't actually matter because they had landed, and that was the important part, to get them to land. And once they landed, the puffins were like, yeah, okay, I guess I'll make a nest here. I'm familiar with the area. I'll stick around. And so they did. And all told, it took more than 10 years. But it worked. The puffins resettled on the island and other islands nearby, and now there were over 1,000 breeding pairs of puffins, thanks to this plucky little group of scientists. And they have pulled the puffins out of their trophic cascade and out of their cascade effect. But very importantly, those disapproving scientists, those finger-wagging naysayers, don't meddle with the puffins. They admitted they were wrong. And they started using this chick relocation method that the plucky little scientists had started themselves. And now, all told, that method has been used to rebuild and sustain the populations of 47 other species of birds. The scientists learned that they had been wrong and that they can take a hand to save a lot of very endangered species. So that's a heartwarming story, yay. Humans helping to restore an ecosystem that they themselves had damaged. But what it gives us is now a third data point, more proof that it is possible to reverse damage in an ecosystem. It's been done elsewhere, and it can be done in Perl. But where do you start? Absolutely, most importantly, it must come from the top. Perl leadership must make this a top priority. Peer-reviewed studies have shown over and over again across all industries that if you have a change effort within an organization and you do not have support from the top, I don't care how grassroots it is, it will fail. Almost 100% of them will fail if it doesn't have support from the top. So if the Perl Foundation and other leaders in the Perl ecosystem, if they do not participate in, if they do not support actively changing this community, then the entire ecosystem will continue to cascade, and it will reach an extinction event. And this doesn't simply mean blog posts from on high, saying nice things and platitudes, oh, we're going to make a difference, we're going to have standards of conduct, and that will make everything better. It has to be actions, real actions, meaningful actions. But it's not just the people at the top. Everyone is responsible for this. Actions are necessary by everyone. Remember, you are what you tolerate. So if you see bad behavior and you allow it to happen, it's as though you did it yourself. But if you don't feel comfortable calling someone else out for their bad behavior, because it is difficult and it is easy to do wrong, if you don't feel comfortable with that, look at yourself. Check your own behavior first in every interaction you have inside of the community and outside of it. Don't just treat the people nice outside of the community. Do it inside as well. And it doesn't take much. It can just be one small thing, right? Small actions taken by a lot of people aggregate to huge change. So what are some of those actions you can do? For crying out loud, enforce that standards of conduct. Standards of conduct, code of conduct, SOC, COC, I don't care what you call it. That is just hiding behind terms, if that's what you choose to argue about, is what you're going to call this thing. It doesn't matter what you call it, it's what it contains within and what you do with it. So to use a standards of conduct properly, please seek out, receive, and provide training on how to enforce it. How to enforce it in such a way that everyone is able to live up to those standards that you yourself have documented. And if some people can't live up to those standards, then what that training will do is it will empower you and give you the training you need so you can empathetically show people the door if they can't live up to your standards. So don't tolerate low standards anymore. You're better than that. Don't tolerate unwelcoming behavior. You are what you tolerate. So if you tolerate assholes, what does that make you? And what you see here is a book by Robert Sutton. It is a business book. It's about business and management and that sort of stuff. It is the no asshole rule. It is brilliant. While it is about business and management, it applies to all human organizations. It is just really well done. I encourage everyone to go out, buy it, read it, give it to a friend, and then buy another copy for themselves. It is that good. So another thing that you can do is get the word out, talk about it. Just like the puffins wouldn't land on an island until they saw birds like them there. So the community, You're not going to attract new people. The community will not grow. Balance will not be regained if people outside of the ecosystem don't see that the ecosystem is getting healthier. And right now, they're not looking at you. They're avoiding you. Give them a good, positive reason to pay attention. Announce this. Be open, be honest, be sincerely apologetic about what has happened in the past and what you are doing to fix it in the future. And then ask for feedback. Talk to people inside the community, outside of the community. How are we doing? How can we be better? And then follow through on that. Because asking for feedback and following through on it, that's a great way to build trust. So be loud about this. Be bold, be humble, and be authentic. But don't you dare be in a rush. You can't rush something like this. It does take time to correct a trophic cascade and a cascade effect. It took more than 10 years from idea to success for the puffins. More than 10. So these things take time. It will take a while for this to start kicking in. But all of this, frankly, it assumes that the cascade effect hasn't already gone too far. It may, in fact, already be too late. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. You should absolutely try, because after all, the alternative is not good. These slides are already available on Internet Archive. Thank you for having me.